Sicily, a mafia boss climbed up the ranks in the mafia by taking out anyone who dared cross his path over with a tractor.
Provenzano got his place in the Corleonese mafia by being a superb killer.
In Italy, another mafia boss murdered a farmer who reported him to the police right after getting out of jail. These might sound unbelievable, but this is a glimpse into other horrible crimes mafia bosses do while they are ruling the world. In this video, we've compiled a list of many more old mafia bosses who do the same, and the first case is that of Sebastiano Di Gaetano. What happens when a seemingly ordinary barber goes on to become the leader of one of the most notorious crime families? Well, that's the story of Sebastiano Di Gaetano. And there's more to him than that. Born in Sicily, Italy, Sebastiano did not grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. He first stepped on U.S. soil at the age of 36 and was just a man who wanted a simple life. After a decade-long struggle to secure a job, he became a barber when his family moved to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Unfortunately, only 2 years later, Brooklyn would suffer the heinous side of Sebastiano, the barber. Sebastiano first caught the eyes of law enforcement officers when he was arrested as a suspect in the kidnapping of 2 young children to demand ransom. Strangely, these charges were dropped as there was no proof of his involvement. Around this time, Sebastiano was also the leader of a Williamsburg-based crime gang. This gang would later evolve to become the Bonanno crime family, one of the Big Five of the New York Mafia. The family also built significant criminal interests in California and Arizona. Months later, when Giuseppe Morello was being prosecuted for counterfeiting money, Sebastiano was temporarily named the Capo dei Capi, or boss of bosses of the New York Big Five. However, his leadership as a crime boss ended quite quickly when Niccolo Schiro replaced him. Here's the mysterious side to it. Only months after being replaced, Sebastiano vanished from America. He was nowhere to be found, and his wife and daughter were never seen again. Were they murdered? Did they run away? No one knows. But here's someone whose fate everyone knows about, and whose brutality will continue to send chills down people's spines. The man was John Gotti. Born in 1940, John Gotti grew up in a life of organized crime. As a teenager, he joined a local gang and quickly became involved in crime, doing everything from stealing cars to hijacking trucks. He was tough, smart, and knew how to get things done, which caught the attention of Carmine Fatico, a captain in the Gambino crime family. Gotti's real rise began in the 1970s when he started working closely with Agnello Della Croce, the underboss of the Gambino family. Della Croce saw potential in Gotti and mentored him. Gotti proved his loyalty to his new boss when he led a hit on James McBratney, who had killed a relative of the Gambino boss at the time. This act earned him respect and a reputation as someone not to be messed with.
His picture's on page 1 of newspapers. His name is all over TV. He's a headline figure.
After becoming the boss of the Gambino crime family in 1985, Gotti attracted significant attention from law enforcement due to his flamboyant lifestyle and media presence, which was unusual for a mafia boss. Despite being charged with serious crimes multiple times, Gotti managed to walk free in several trials. Gotti's ability to repeatedly evade justice became a sensation in the media, elevating his persona. Reporters began referring to him as the Teflon Don because no charges seemed to stick to him, much like food sliding off a non-stick Teflon pan. While the Lufthansa heist, which was recorded as the largest robbery in the country's history, was primarily orchestrated by the Lucchese family, another Italian-American crime family, John Gotti played a significant role in the heist's success, particularly in eliminating those who might have posed a threat to the operation's secrecy. After the heist, several of the people involved either disappeared or were found dead, leading to speculation that Gotti helped orchestrate these murders to ensure that no one talked to the authorities. These speculations have been validated by Henry Hill, an informant who suggested that Gotti was involved in the cleanup operation after the heist. Although John Gotti died in 2002 of throat cancer in prison, his crime family is still one of the most notorious crime families in the world. Speaking of mafia bosses who began committing crimes at a young age, next on the list is a mobster who etched his name into history as a criminal who haunted Chicago for a long time. His name was Tony Accardo. Just like John Gotti, Tony Accardo led a crime family, but here's how he started. In the 1920s, he joined the infamous Chicago outfit as a low-level officer. Shortly after, he started working as the bodyguard of Al Capone, an American gangster. During his time with Capone, Accardo earned his trust through his loyalty and ruthlessness and quickly rose through the ranks. By the 1930s, Accardo had established himself as a key player within the Chicago outfit. He was involved in several criminal activities, and unlike John Gotti, he maintained a low profile and avoided avoided media attention. By the 1940s, Accardo had become the de facto leader of the Chicago outfit. Under his command, the organization expanded its operations nationwide and engaged in numerous high-profile crimes. His leadership solidified the outfit's status as one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations in the country, making Accardo one of its most influential figures. While Accardo's public profile was not as attractive as Capone's, he had a very impressive criminal record. As a matter of fact, his influence extended beyond criminal activities. He was a force to be reckoned with in society, and he was discreet with his crimes. He never for once admitted that he headed an organized crime syndicate.
We have information which may be said to be general public information that you headed the Chicago organized crime syndicate for many years. Isn't that true?
No, sir.
When he was asked what illegal activity he had ever been involved in, he said this:
I gambled.
Despite an arrest record in 1922, he only spent at most one night in jail. Outliving most of his fellow crime bosses, Accardo ruled the world as a mafia boss for a long time until his death in 1992. The next person on our list is a crime boss from Italy who became so power-drunk that he took over a crime family by shedding blood. He was known as Luciano Leggio. Luciano Leggio became a criminal mastermind at quite an early age, but he also got his first conviction at the very same age. This was a 6-month sentence for charges of stealing corn. Luciano also murdered the farmer who had reported him to the police immediately after he got released from jail. While in prison, he made a friend, Salvatore Riina, an Italian mobster and chief of the Sicilian Mafia, a group he later joined. Soon after his release, Leggio was welcomed into the crime family by Sicilian Mafia boss Michele Navarra. What Navarra didn't know was that he would be inviting death into his home. Leggio's thirst for power grew out of control. He started going against the crime boss and breaking several mafia codes. After a failed assassination attempt on him by Navarra's men, Leggio had to retaliate. Navarra was in a car when he was murdered alongside a fellow. He had been shot several times. Days later, 3 other close friends of Navarra were murdered. With that, Leggio climbed the ladder to become the newest leader of the Corleonese crime family. With Leggio in power now, a new and more violent era had begun for the Corleonese crime family. He became a strategic crime overlord, using his relationships with alliances to eliminate any rivals that came his way. Leggio also had plans for the future of Corleonese. 2 young mafiosi, Vito Riina and Bernardo Provenzano, were groomed to become his successors. Quite literally, Leggio taught them all there was to know about the mafia and its warfare, basically everything. Now you see why the Corleonese mafia became so strong despite law enforcement forces and anti-mafia rules trying to bring an end to them. Luciano was the brain right from the beginning. He did die in prison from a heart attack at age 68, but his legacy will continue to bring nightmares to those who got to experience his mindless acts. Ever heard of The Undertaker? And no, I am not talking about the wrestler you know as The Undertaker. I'm talking about a mafia boss who was on top of the world during his time. He was Stefano Magaddino. Born on October 10, 1891, in Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily, Magaddino grew up in a world deeply tied to mafia traditions. Early on, Magaddino's clan found themselves fighting with the Buccellato Mafia clan, but after some brutal killings, the young Magaddino emigrated to New York in 1902. Once in New York, he settled in Brooklyn in a large Castellammare community. After becoming a naturalized U.S. citizen in 1924, Magaddino ran a legitimate funeral home business, but his real income came from smuggling wine and spirits during the Prohibition period. This made him a key figure in the criminal underworld, which was responsible for supplying several speakeasies, an illicit establishment that sold alcoholic beverages in Buffalo and Niagara Falls. When the prohibition on wine and spirits ended, Magaddino's operations expanded. His crime family got into loan sharking, illegal gambling, and extortion. Magaddino ruled the Buffalo underworld for 50 years, making him the longest-serving boss in American mafia history. But his influence began to wane in 1964 when police uncovered $521,000 hidden in his funeral home and his son's house. This discovery led to a loss of trust among his followers, who believed that the boss was living fat while the rest of the gang was suffering. Magaddino passed away on July 19, 1974, from a heart attack at the age of 82. He was buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery in Niagara Falls, but his death did not mark the end of his crime family's significance in the mafia world. Remember the Chicago outfit? Well, they had another crime boss who was also as brutal as the rest. He was called DiFronzo. John DiFronzo, born December 13, 1928, was a key figure in the Chicago outfit, known by his nickname No-Nose. His infamous moniker came from an unfortunate occurrence during a 1949 burglary when he sliced off part of his nose while jumping through a window. But the police were able to reattach it almost perfectly when they arrested him, and he then got to serve 2 years in jail for burglary. Over the years, he became involved in a range of activities, including a suspected role in the unsolved 1952 murder of a West Side politician named Charles Gross. DiFronzo was also linked to a loan sharking operation with former Chicago police officers in 1964. In the early 1980s, he was chosen by syndicate leader Joseph Ayupa to oversee criminal operations in Chicago's western suburbs, even over the acting boss Joseph Ferriola. This position eventually led him to become one of the key leaders of the outfit. In 1993, DiFronzo, along with other outfit members, was convicted of federal racketeering charges related to gambling operations. However, this conviction was overturned on appeal, and he was released in 1994. Later, in 2009, DiFronzo was named in a civil lawsuit accusing him and others of attempting to extort $400,000. John DiFronzo passed away on May 27, 2018, from complications related to Alzheimer's disease. It's always an exciting experience for mafia bosses when they rule the world, but things can significantly change in a second for them and push them back into a world of nothingness. This was exactly what happened in the case of this mafia boss named Frank Costello. Frank Costello was born on January 26, 1891, in a small Italian town called Laropoli. In 1895, he and his family moved to New York City to reunite with his father, who had set up a small Italian grocery store in East Harlem. Young Costello was introduced to a life of crime and gangs early on by his brother. By the age of 13, he was already involved in local gang activities and even took on the name Frankie. His teenage years were a mix of petty crimes and short stints in jail. By 1908, 1912, and 1917, Frankie was already in and out of jail for assault and robbery, but those were only petty crimes. Things really started heating up in the 1920s when he teamed up with Lucky Luciano, the co-founder of the National Crime Syndicate. Together, they expanded into bootlegging, gambling, and supplying illegal alcohol to places across New York, Florida, and beyond. Well, crime can only last for a short while before the long hands of the law begins to catch up. So by 1951, Costello's empire started facing some serious heat. The U.S. government, led by Senator Estes Kefauver, began cracking down on organized crime. When Costello was being interrogated for his involvement in crimes, he refused to answer questions. This move didn't sit well with the Senate, and they slapped him with an 18-month prison sentence for contempt. After that, he was convicted again of income tax evasion, adding another 5 years to his prison time. Just when you think things couldn't get worse, in 1957, Costello had to deal with an even bigger threat, his rival Vito Genovese. On May 2, 1957, a gunman allegedly sent by Genovese shot Costello in his hotel lobby, but despite the attempt on his life, Costello survived. After surviving the murder attempt, Costello got hit that same year with yet another contempt charge, adding more prison time to his already lengthy sentence. By the time Costello was released in 1961, his influence in the underworld had significantly faded. He even lost his U.S. citizenship. After Genovese's death in 1969, Costello couldn't regain his old power. Instead, he took on a quieter role, offering advice and settling disputes, far removed from the hustle and bustle of day-to-day mob operations. In 1973, after a heart attack, Frank Costello passed away at the age of 82. Remember Luciano Leggio's friend from prison? Yes, Salvatore. Let's talk about him and his influence in the world of organized crime. Salvatore Riina. Salvatore Toto Riina grew up in a really poor home. His father, while attempting to sell the powder from an unexploded bomb in their home, mistakenly set it off, killing him and one of Salvatore's brothers. It's safe to say that Salvatore Toto Riina grew up with and learned from Luciano Leggio. Together with Bernardo Provenzano, they became Leggio's beast, aiding in most of his assassinations, if not all. Following Leggio's arrest, Salvatore was made the new boss of bosses and leader of the Corleonesi. Salvatore's rule was nothing short of offsetting and brutal. In creating fear in the hearts of prosecutors and other authorities, he orchestrated the murder of several anti-mafia activists, prosecutors, police officers, and court officials. He ordered the killing of women and children, an action that broke a main mafia rule. It was estimated that around 100 to 200 people were killed by Salvatore. Despite multiple missions to take out the mafia, Riina could not be stopped. This lasted until the Maxi trial. Following his arrest on January 13, 1993, Riina was to face the panel in what was called the Maxi trial, the largest trial in the history of Italy. It comprised 707 suspects and was then reduced to 475 defendants, notable names of which included Luciano Leggio, Pippo Callo of the Porta Nuova Mafia, Michele Greco, who was head of the Sicilian Mafia Commission at the time, Salvatore Riina himself, and Bernardo Provenzano, chief of the Corleonesi. For his murders and mafia dealings, Salvatore Riina was handed 26 life sentences, and the aftermath of Riina's arrest? Well, the Corleonesi Mafia and the Sicilian Mafia Commission murdered almost all court officials and authorities. This was all stated in the Capaci bombing, the Via D'Amelio bombing, and the Christmas massacre of 1984. Riina passed away on November 17, 2017, just a day after turning 87. He was in a medically induced coma following 2 surgeries in the prison unit of Maggiore Hospital in Parma. The exact cause of his death wasn't disclosed. This next was so powerful that he created a commission that brought together several mafia families. He was called Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano had a fascinating journey from a poor immigrant to the most powerful mob boss in New York. He was an Italian-born gangster who was regarded as the most powerful chief of American organized crime in the 1930s, and many called him the architect of the American Mafia. Lucky started his career as a criminal at a very young age. At the age of 10, he was already involved in mugging, shoplifting, and extortion. He even sold heroin and landed in jail. Upon coming out of jail, he teamed up with other young gangsters and earned the nickname Lucky after he survived the gang war attack in 1929. In 1936, Luciano was convicted of compulsory prostitution, largely due to the relentless efforts of Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey. Despite being imprisoned, Luciano continued to wield considerable power, orchestrating activities from within. He received a sentence of 30 to 50 years. Despite being imprisoned, Luciano continued to wield considerable power, orchestrating activities from within. During World War II, Luciano brokered a deal with the U.S. government to safeguard the docks from Axis sabotage, which led to a reduction in his sentence and his eventual deportation to Italy in 1946. In 1931, Lucky Luciano revolutionized organized crime in America by establishing the Commission, a governing body designed to oversee and mediate disputes among the country's most powerful mafia families. The Commission was made up of representatives from the 7 most powerful mafia families, including the 5 dominant New York families. Luciano's vision for the Commission was to reduce violence and ensure cooperation among the families, treating organized crime as a business rather than a series of personal vendettas. In January 1962, Luciano died, but the creation of the Commission marked a turning point in the history of the American Mafia. It remained a central institution in the Mafia's operations for decades, influencing the course of organized crime in America well beyond Luciano's lifetime. Lucky Luciano tried to reduce violence, but this next Mafia boss wasn't a lover of peace. His name was Bernardo Provenzano. One of the successors following Luciano Leggio's fall was Bernardo Provenzano, also called Bernie the Tractor. And why was he called Bernie the Tractor? Let's get into that. Born the 3rd of 7 children, Provenzano had quite a humble beginning. This was soon disrupted when his family suffered cattle raiding and the theft of their farm produce. By age 25, he was well into the crime world already, serving the then mob boss Luciano Leggio. In becoming the leader's henchman, he performed some of the most hideous crimes, including the murder of Corleonesi mob boss Michele Novara, an assassination that made Leggio the new mob boss. Together with Salvatore Riina, he also murdered a number of Novara's followers, almost eliminating Novara's whole clan. Even though he was good at his work as an assassin, Leggio described him as having the brain of a chicken but the aim of an angel. What are we missing? Yes, Bernie the Tractor. Provenzano was described as Bernie the Tractor for his style of murder under Salvatore's rule. He mowed people down. Provenzano, on his assassination contracts, would kidnap his victims, shoot them in the legs, leaving them motionless, and then run them over with a tractor. This went on for a while, and both Provenzano and Salvatore took joy in it. It's a sick thing to kill people. It's another thing to mow them like grass. After the Corleonesi bloody revolution under Salvatore's leadership, Provenzano was handed the reins of the Mafia. During his 23-year rule, he made the Corleonesi a more financially driven gang than a bloodthirsty one. Despite Leggio saying he had the brain of a chicken, Provenzano proved him wrong. He had a much more lucrative rule than Leggio and Salvatore combined. This he attained through illegal means. For this reason, he was named the Accountant by many. Provenzano later died from health complications in 2016, only 5 years through his 20-life sentence in 2011. If Provenzano's tractor reputation hits hard in your ears, this last guy's case will shock you even more. Vito Di Giorgio. The Sicily-born Italian moved to the U.S. in 1904 and stayed briefing in New York City, where he made quite the connections. He moved to New Orleans, where he got married and also took his first steps into the underworld. Identified as a friend and cousin to the boss of bosses, Giuseppe Morello, Giorgio was made the leader of the Black Hander gang. Around this time, he took an alias name for himself, Joseph Caronia. One of his most bizarre crimes as the leader of this group was when he mailed a letter to a big Italian grocer demanding money in a not-so-unclear manner. It only gets more shocking when you know how he signed the letter King of the Mafia. Anyway, he and his gang were later arrested for this crime but were released shortly because there was no actual evidence linking them to it. Years later, after he and his family moved to Los Angeles, he bought a grocery shop of his own. Somehow, no one understood why the store was sold, especially considering that its owner was already making the best sales. You don't just sell something this good. As part of his crimes, Giorgio orchestrated a failed bank robbery in Los Angeles, where a local businessman was murdered in cold blood. The 6 robbers who were caught for this crime were taken to court, and the judgment was one that would always be remembered. All 6 men were sentenced to death by hanging, making the case the only one in America where 6 men were hanged to death for the murder of one. That must have left chills down people's spine. However, even the life of a seemingly easygoing grocer like Giorgio could hang by a thread. 3 assassination attempts were made on him. The first was made on May 13, 1916, leaving him fatally wounded but not dead. A second attempt was made 5 years later when he was shot in the leg as he returned home with his family from the beach. Despite having ideas on which of his nemesis would have ordered the assassination, he told the police he knew no one who would have orchestrated it. Sadly, this lie cost him a year later. While with a friend at a saloon in 1922, 3 gunmen entered and released fire on both of them, leaving Giorgio dead from headshots while he was seated for a shave. The murder got the eyes of the press and probably his enemies too. Giorgio, the king of the mafia, was finally dead. If you found this video interesting, click on any of the cards on the screen for more interesting videos.